Hey guys, I just finished recording this for 3 hours. Didn't mean to do that. Went way longer than I meant to, and didn't even answer that as many questions as I meant to. Very rambling and all over the place. We'll see how you guys like the stuff, but I think I'm going to cut the 3-hour session into 2 parts, and you'll get one today and another one in like a day or two, just to spread them out a little bit, because I think dumping one giant 3-hour video might be a bit much. Maybe. I don't know. This should be unusual. I'll probably do like anywhere from a 40 to 60 to 90 minute video each week, and that'll be it. But let's say this is a response to the excitement, and also how thankful I am to this, how much support you guys are showing right off the bat. So you guys sent me tons of questions, and here's a longer than normal first week, I guess. Yeah. Hey guys, I just want to say thank you, and welcome to the first episode of the Q&A series that's exclusive to Patreon, and questions asked by Patreon people and everything. I don't know how I can adequately thank you. This has been an absurdly large outpouring of support that I was not prepared for, and I don't even know how to respond to it, and I'm gonna just kind of power through it today. There's definitely anxiety there. It's one of those moments that makes the like imposter syndrome flare up, that general sense where whenever you get like a bunch of support or compliments or whatever, there's a vague sense that they've mistaken you for someone else and whatnot. But thank you guys, thank you. I did not expect this kind of response, and it's been very significant, and we're just gonna hop in here. And why are we staring at this screen instead of just the actual video game? Well, I figured this first episode we'll go and do Path of Diablo, which is a rebalancing mod thing that has custom servers for Diablo 2, Lord of Destruction. It's just a nice, comfortable nostalgia blanket to hear all the audio and video elements of this particular game, and also it's very mindless, and it's very not Let's Play friendly, so it's perfect for either a multiplayer session or this exact situation where I'm just mindlessly playing a game while we answer a bunch of questions and read messages and stuff. Some of these aren't messages, some of them are just support. I mean, some of these aren't questions, some of these are just supportive messages, and I think I'm just going to read them in general. I guess this might be slightly less of a Q&A series and more of a fan mail series, which also is a Q&A. Well, I mean, not more of a fan mail series, it's both, whatever. Anyway, this is the launcher, and the reason I wanted to wait till the video was started first is because I want to hear that nostalgic little intro and catch that on video. Yeah, that's the one. I played this game for like a year straight. It was probably my first ever online multiplayer game. Mainly, at the very least, I had played Age of Empires 2, the Age of Kings expansion on, was the Age of Kings the name of the expansion or the sequel? I had the sequel. I had the expansion, whatever. That was my first online game ever, but I was so early at it that I didn't understand the difference between a username and a password, and I mixed them up, so my username was E5G3, because that's what I thought was my password. Listen, I was like 9. I didn't really have this shit figured out. But the first online multiplayer game that I really got hooked to for a while and was playing with friends as like a community and everything, and it was actually like a social thing, was Diablo 2. I played this game like every single goddamn day before and after school. I would fight with my brother over who gets to use the computer, because we had one computer that could play video games, and we had one internet connection, which of course was dial-up at the time, which also meant that we had to deal with the issue of whether or not people in the house tried to use the phone and stuff like that. Not that was, honestly, that just wasn't that common. And also I had some rather shameful evenings where I would sneak off and try to play this game in the middle of the night via like turning on the computer and logging onto the internet while everyone was sleeping, which was harder when you had dial-up, because you had to like smother your computer with I smothered the computer with like actual pillows to try to drown out the dial-up sounds so that people wouldn't notice that I was up in the middle of the night and everything. I have been playing this game a little bit lately because right here I have a group of friends that has that's tried to do revive this. That's why I have this mod installed in the first place. Is we've been playing hardcore characters together. We're having a lot of trouble because we're all adults with lives and jobs. It's very hard just to coordinate a large group of people together, but I've been playing as a paladin for that, and that's been some fun. I didn't actually fully plan where I wanted to go with this. Just go for it one way or another. I might even just make another paladin, honestly. Although it is extra mindless just to say screw it and be a necromancer with an army of people running around. I can't help it. I really do like paladins. Fuck it, I'll be a druid, which I had an embarrassing moment. One of my old usernames was Shaman King instead of Sebastian SB before druid classes and everything, and people would sing Shaman King to me when I would log into Halo, and I was like, oh my god, this is the worst theme song ever. And also I was already well beyond caring about that manga I cared about for 5 seconds when I made that username. But so I would lie to people and say, no, it's actually named after the shaman in Diablo 2. And I've made that lie many times, and no one has ever called me out on it. And I log into Diablo 2 with my friends, and I'm correcting them like, there's no druid in Diablo, it's a shaman, because now I'm believing my own lie because no one's ever corrected me for it. It's a druid. My lie has not even worked this whole time. My embarrassing, I had a username based on an anime once that I didn't even like enough to keep watching. Patronizing. Ha. We're just going to create a nice little solo game with a name and a password, because then nobody will leave me alone, or no one will come after me here. Maximum players? None. There we go. Create game. I think I should be safe. Alright. So let's get started, why don't we? This won't be the best thing to watch if you want story, because I'm definitely just going to be clicking through crap real quick. Alright, so first message. Dannish asks, what is best in life? Pineapple pizza. There we go. Alright. Jesse Miller sent you a message. I'm kind of going through, I'll be going through these in a somewhat random order, and also I have not had time to pre-filter them. Y'all sent in a lot quickly. I have been caught off guard by how many there are. I almost certainly won't get through them all this episode, so we'll get to them more of them next episode, but it's good to have a lot right now, because, frankly, these tend to peter off over time. Alright, so Jesse Miller asks a question. Do you believe work ethic is a natural thing or a learned behavior? How do you come to have such a strong work ethic? Any suggestions for those who struggle with it? Well, how do I have a strong work ethic? I don't, it's weird, I kind of don't fully associate myself with having a strong work ethic, as odd as that might seem. Is that surprised anyone? I guess maybe. Let's just fade that thing. There we go. It's too dense. How do I put this? I mean, I don't know about natural, because I don't know if work is natural entirely.
So it begins.
To an extent, if we want to make natural arguments, I feel like people just exist to survive, and it's a recursive loop of just what you need to do to exist, and that's it. I feel like people just need food and so on to survive, and social engagements. So on some level, okay, yeah, let's explore this. This actually might go somewhere, because on some level, social engagements are confirmed as being a natural part of human behavior and so on. We do naturally form societies, there's tribalism and all that, like that's all an active part of how we function. So you could argue that how we're perceived amongst a society and amongst our peers, and needing to care about that and compare favorably with others, is a natural component of how we exist. So on some level, work ethic might be argued as being something that has evolutionary value, and obviously I don't think when somebody says natural, they don't almost never mean what natural means. They almost always mean something else entirely. But I'm going that route anyway. But I think there's some value to that. Like people need. Humans suck. We're really bad. We have very few skills. We have opposable thumbs and can use tools, which is not literally unique to us. There's definitely other animals that use tools, but we're especially prone to it. We don't have a lot of really impressive physicality. One of our primary skills is that we're marathon runners, which is actually rather impressive, is that we can just run for an incredibly long time. We're not fast, as you should have noticed by now, by being one. But this whole thing where we can just keep running and running and running, seemingly for hours and so on, not seemingly, literally for hours, is not a normal thing for animal behavior. A lot of animals tire themselves out and they quickly exhaust themselves. I have no idea if that is because those animals are physically incapable of pacing themselves, or if those animals are just stupid, and maybe they don't consider the concept of, like, maybe they don't have enough thought to consider pacing themselves, and I have no idea. That's a whole field of study to get into to figure out, and somebody probably has actually, this question of like whether other animals are so bad at marathon running by comparison because they just don't understand the concept of pacing themselves, and they just go full bore, and then they sometimes literally full bore, and then exhaust themselves immediately, and do the cheetah approach, which is they just go for it for a very short burst, and then hopefully it works out, because they're just going to give up in a moment if it didn't work out. Now I'm on that entire tangent about marathon running, which was a weird... I was trying to talk about like any strengths humans have. We can use tools, we have social ties, and I just doubled up on that. That was a bad idea. And we can marathon runner, like the only things I know of that are particularly cool we can do. And so we kind of have to lean on that social thing, because we're bad at surviving individually. A decent example is probably, this is a fictional concept, but I thought its summary was interesting to me, mainly because it has larger ramifications. I was reading The Witcher books, The Last Wish and stuff like that, and Yennefer makes a specific point, and I said this on a podcast I think recently. Yennefer makes a point that the greatest enemy of mankind is dragons, which is funny, of course, because dragons aren't real, but humans suck at living in the wild, and one of the many reasons that is that pregnancy is brutal. A woman becomes pregnant, they become quite vulnerable as a direct result. They're pregnant for an incredibly long time, nearly an entire year spent being pregnant, and then at any point not only is the woman vulnerable, but the baby is very vulnerable. And then your grand reward of coming to term is that then the baby comes into fruition and exists as a living creature outside of the woman, and boy oh boy, they can die of virtually anything, like every day, basically, and they're vulnerable, they're tiny, they're very loud, they never stop being loud, they just attract things constantly by making noise. It's kind of a disaster. It's amazing we made it at all, honestly, when I think about how every human has to survive being a baby in the wild originally. That's incredible to me. I don't understand how that even happened. But at some point, the idea is there. It's like, okay, so that means we need to work together to survive. That's the inherent part of the human experience. And there's some animals that work together, obviously, but there's a lot of lone creatures that just exist, and that's all they do. And they just basically meet up to mate, and then kind of often split even after that. Not even necessarily sticking around for the pregnancy itself. But humans, they need tribes, and they need, like, shelter in order to keep baby alive, and they need, like, warriors, and they need walls, and the natural conclusion to go here is you keep going until eventually, like, you have cities and stuff like that. And so, like, that the idea with Yennefer here was that they're talking about the idea, like, that's the ultimate villain in at least the Witcher universe is this idea that like a dragon can just fly into your city and burn it to the ground, and that's the ultimate threat mankind can have, something that destroys the entirety of its societies. Obviously, dragons aren't real, which is a strong advantage that we have, is that they never existed. But that's just that's not, you can replace it with any metaphor basically, like because obviously we tend to be the dragon. We are the threat to our own societies because real dragons don't exist, and so we just make our own. Great job, mankind. It's our specialty, is to just create our new problems. When we were lucky enough to escape all of them, we're like, no, I want those problems back, and we return right back to that territory. But it also, it's a decent example of how massively humanity overpowers nature itself, especially the animal kingdom part of nature, because, you know, natural disasters are still a huge thing. But basically, in order to talk about a real threat to human society, we basically have to invent fictional concepts to be the threat and the true villain, because of how strong our social interactions are. And yes, this is a lot of weird off-topic ranting, but it all does strengthen a point ultimately, and I'm usually going somewhere with this stuff, and this is actually a good sampler of how these Q&A videos tend to go, if you guys are new to this and didn't see the old versions back in the day, like a year ago, I want to say? I don't remember when the last episode was. It's far enough back that I was like hand-wringing in one of the last episodes about the concept of like, whether or not I should have Andrew on the 999 series, because I was premiering the series, I think, around the time, and we had I knew that people were going to react negatively to some aspects, and while other people would be up for it, and I was trying to argue that it was the best way to go. But anyway, yeah, our social interactions are so strong, and so much part of how we're able to survive overall, that's arguably one of our greatest strengths ever, is our ability to create societies. And it's like probably the entire reason why we exist right now. Good job, us. I'm gonna go ahead and just become a werewolf real quick, don't mind me. Just a fun little thing I like to do. Anyway, there we go. As I talk about humans and the power thereof, I then immediately become a beast creature. Because that's what we do. We abstract it, we fantasize about becoming these monsters that have all these powers, because humans are rather feeble and unimpressive in the animal kingdom, and so we're like, what if it was a wolf man with a weirdly shapely ass? Alright, so, talking about... Oh, that's a bad sound. Oh, that was a lame one. But talking about that, yes, so going to the work ethic topic, it might be natural, but not for the reasons one might expect. I would say that a work ethic is probably not natural in the form of, like, I need to apply myself very significantly in order to accomplish a goal, mainly because the goals that we try to accomplish with our work ethic, I think, are largely very abstract, and I think I don't think that a lot of the problems we have are compatible with elements of human evolution. I don't think that we would care about many of these things, like whether or not you get your TPS report done on time and shit like that, and I think that's why people struggle with the idea of keeping up with their work ethic in these contexts, is because conceptually these are weird, crazy things that don't have natural analogs. But what does have a natural analog is that you're in a society, and you are observed by other people and judged by other people. So it's a weird thing where, like, people we assign our self-worth in some cases to how much income we make, and whether or not we have an impressive job and stuff like that. And a lot of that stuff is wrong to think, but I think a lot of it's also natural to think, and that's difficult to reconcile, I think, those two separate elements, that it's both natural and unhealthy, basically. But, you know, both can be true. So yeah, I think I've convinced myself that work ethic is on some level natural, even though the exact definition of how someone would expect to use it is probably not natural. I think it ultimately just boils down to the fact that their societal judgments and shame are like built into us. And so being seen by others as not working consistently and accomplishing things and so on is like something that's constantly in the background for us. And I think people who lack that element of shame and insecurity, as problematic as it can be, I think those people also might be more likely to be the kind of people that are like examples of like a failure to launch, or like people who are stuck living with their the family that raised them for very long, and they seem unmotivated to ever really make any kinds of progress or get a job or do things that in many cases a lot of people have to do and have convinced themselves they have to do, and don't need any sort of outside motivation to tell them that that's what you're supposed to do, because they've already learned that, and it's sort of just taken for granted. And I think some of the frustration a lot of people have, especially millennials lately, is that when they do all the right things and don't get what they're supposed to get, then they're like, what's wrong? And I think to some extent a lot of the arguments and negativity and toxicity on the internet can to some extent boil down to disappointed people, essentially. People like me, in some ways, that are just people that like think they did all the things they were told they were supposed to do. You go through high school and you go to college and you put out applications and you do all these things and you work all day, and the end result is that you don't make an income, or you don't get hired at all, and things are just going to shit, and you're like, but I did all the things I was supposed to do. Why isn't any of the stuff working? And that might even be on some level where people have to then, well, if I did everything right, that must mean that something else is wrong. And that's when they start looking towards like societal problems, which is that, is there oppression, or are immigrants the problem, or is there something I can blame that is outside of myself that is responsible for all the bad things I did, because I am stuck feeling this shame that is burned into me that causes me to care about doing a good job in life, or care about how people view me, and that part of you that tells you to have a work ethic or get a job and everything, that part of your brain is still firing, but even though you've done everything, it's still not working, and you're not getting what you're supposed to do. So I think that leads to people having to push that problem on other people and find some explanation outside of themselves that explains why their life isn't working, because if they're doing everything they're supposed to do and it still isn't happening, then like that must mean that it's something else's fault, right? And this is going out on a whole trip so far. I should probably keep that so I can sell it. This is not scripted, by the way. I didn't read this question until a moment ago, and I'm just going in so many directions apparently. But yes, it's amazing that all I thought of for the other one was like pineapple pizza. But yeah, I think it's more or less the idea. Yeah, work ethic is on some level natural, but not universal, because there's people who just don't have a work ethic and don't apply themselves, and you have to like almost figure out how to reprogram them to get them to ever do anything besides just because like there are people who will just exclusively engage in vices. They'll just hang out and do whatever makes them feel good all the time, and will not get past those impulses. And I have no answers on how to deal with that kind of stuff. And it's probably because in their brain they're not wrong. The whole point of positive feelings and so on for humanity is the concept of your brain rewards you with chemicals when you do things that are supposed to be good for you. It's the whole motivation system. It's so universal that when we make up things like Gladys in Portal, she's motivated by the same things. She just has a code version of like, I need to remember the difference between these two things. I'll just alternate between them, it's fine. She has like a code version of the chemicals that release in your brain that give you pleasure for doing the thing you're supposed to do. And I think to some extent it got us that far, and now it's hard to break. So like you get X amount of, you make it a certain distance, evolutionary speaking, with these chemical reactions in your brain telling you that you're doing the right thing, and and that's the right way to feel. And for the longest time, you're like, all right, cool, so it's going to be that way forever now, right? But then nowadays in modern society, so many things are easier to get that we can just become infinitely sloth. So in some ways, I think a lack of work ethic is actually rather natural for different reasons, because of the fact that, like, our brains are hardwired to just seek out, like, sugar and sex and things like that, and the easier they become to get, the more you might be not motivated to do anything else, to some extent. And some of these are oversimplifications, and some of them are also vary from person to person greatly. Like, the allure of sex is highly variable, and there's a whole Futurama episode making fun of this with, like, the android, like, all the men find android women, and then that just want to give them attention all the time, and then they just stop being in society, essentially. And while it's a funny premise for an episode, I don't think that, even if some people might react that way, I don't think it's nearly universal enough to actually cause the scenario it is. But, you know, it's a cartoon with a 20-minute comedy premise, so it's fine. But when we have access to drugs that make us feel unnaturally good, and we have, like, high calorie and high sugar foods everywhere, and we never have to worry about not having access to water and shelter in many cases, especially if you're growing up in your parents' house. Like, it's very hard to come up with reasons to really make anything of yourself besides basically shame, I want to say. And that shame sounds like the negative version, but, like, it's two sides of a coin, right? There's the shame is what you get for not looking good in society, and pride or esteem or whatever is what you get when you do look good in society, but they're ultimately, it's the same motivator. It's just different outcomes of the same motivator, essentially. And I think that's a more or less accurate idea. The funny thing is, I think that the important question was more related to how I get work ethic, as opposed to the breakdown of natural things. But also, y'all keep telling me, multiple separate people went on about how they loved it so much when I went on about the piebald goat, what? I mean, technically goats. But so many people went on about me doing the piebald coat pattern thing when I was talking about Wolf Link and Zelda. And so, this is probably going to go over well. I don't know. We'll do a feedback system in the comments, because I think I'm going to do this where I'll double check. There might be you might be able to upload on Patreon directly, but I might do this as an unlisted YouTube video I link on Patreon. I haven't done this before yet, so it's all experimental. And the comments can let me know how they feel about how long I spend per question, or so on. Also, you can send me follow-up questions and things like that. But I think I've more or less exhausted that subject of how much I think work ethic is natural, which is to say that it is and isn't, and I basically don't have any concrete answer. And I have how do I put this? I have what I think might be a reverse Dunning-Kruger effect all the time, which is that, for those that don't know, the Dunning-Kruger effect is this concept where when somebody is very uninformed on a subject, they will respond, they will be more likely to be very confident in their views on said subject, and so they'll try to speak as an authority on something that they don't know shit about, and they will confidently do so. And it's just, as somebody who deals with YouTube comments all the time, I am constantly exposed to people that smugly tell me things that they don't even vaguely understand, and it's part amusing and part very sad to see in action. In particular, there's the people that love to tell me how to YouTube, which is fascinating because I've been doing it since 2011, and there's a lot of people that don't at all know what they're talking about, that just say made-up things to me, basically. And in many cases, it's at best a concept of, like, wish fulfillment, which is that they make up a reality. There's a particular kind of content or behavior they would like to see on YouTube, and so they just claim that that type of content is what makes a YouTube channel do well or whatever, because it would be really convenient to live in a world where whatever they personally like is what makes a YouTube channel successful, because then they, you know, everyone would do that, and everyone who isn't doing that is just a stupid person that isn't listening to advice, and they should start doing that. So, like, I get why some people might think that stuff, but it's super not accurate. But anyway, that was the Dunning-Kruger effect itself. I sometimes think I have a reverse Dunning-Kruger effect, which is that I over-explain and over-qualify everything, and often explain virtually everything in terms that make it as clear as possible that I am uncertain about many, many elements of the thing, and I heavily qualify things, and I will even encourage people to research things themselves, such as, if I ever say anything about geology, or, wolf evolution, in the case of the wolfling thing, so on, feel free to research it yourself, because I'm often talking about concepts that I researched about long enough to do a paper on, which admittedly is significantly more than most people do research on anything ever, so I've got that going for me, but it's not like I got my PhD in specifically that topic or anything. I wonder if I should do that. Should I? I mean, that could be a fun Patreon perk. I could upload college papers I wrote as Patreon perks that you can view. I think I still have the text files of crap I wrote about columnar jointing and oxbow lakes and meandering streams and domestication of wolves. I'm not super proud of a lot of those papers because a lot of them were somewhat rushed college assignments that I did for the purpose of just getting, you know, the grade and everything, because that's part of the experience of college, is just trying to not get kicked out of college, which I excelled at. But I actually remember being quite happy with the domestication of wolves paper in particular, because I spent like my entire spring break on it, I want to say. That was a significant time-intensive thing. And I think it's long too, and I got like excellent reactions to it overall. Whereas some of the other ones, like the Meandering Streams one, I literally did all of the research the morning of my presentation, and then did the presentation that day, half off of memory. Which, admittedly, when you do all the research that morning, it helps your memory a bit at times. I need to get this dumb question wrong answered. But yeah, when you hear me overqualifying a bunch of stuff, it's often specifically because I know how much I don't know. I'm in the perfect part of the curve where I'm just informed enough on a lot of subjects to know exactly the fact that I am not a reliable source of information on all of those subjects. And so I'll just start nervously talking for a long time, giving out more information, not really being convinced that I'm a really good source of information, but hey, entertainment show and all that. If you question anything I say, feel free to research it yourself and post your findings in the comments and so on. I am not really emotionally attached to my answers and the idea that they all have to be right and everything. But to get to the actual part of the question, that's probably what they were asking in the first place, before I spent half an hour on not that. And the fact that I was planning 1 hour episodes, but I'm halfway through it on half of one question, so I might do a 2-hour one this first time, just as a thank you guys for your massive contribution. And I also may have singled out Jesse as being one of the first ones, because they're one of the people that has supported me on Patreon since basically the very, very beginning. Like, there are entire Patreon perks that exist specifically because of Jesse. Which is that I just put out the original Patreon thing at the beginning, and there was like no rewards, and then they kept pledging more, and I was like, oh shit, I'll just make up a Patreon perk for this size of pledge, because I was like, I felt guilty that somebody was pledging so much, and I was like, I don't even have a thing that you're getting for that, you're just giving it to me, which they never asked for, and it actually wasn't a good idea to do that, because it was just generally a bad plan on my part. I had that whole Patreon sponsored hour thing for the longest time, where you would get a 1-hour video of a game of your choice if you were supporting me for $25 or more that month. and some people were doing $50 a month. So I was like, you get 2 hours, and that was a whole complicated thing. But I canceled it for a few reasons. One, I was having trouble keeping up with it in the first place, but also communication was weird, where I'd send out the things trying to get people to say what they want, and they kind of wouldn't say it. I think that when it's part of a larger thing like the polls, people are more likely to give me their full... I forgot that was a temporary thing. Weird. Very long, though. I completely forgot that was a temporary shapeshift. I think when asked individually, what do you want right now, and there's no abstraction, I think people get nervous because people weren't really responding a lot of the time. So I had this I have this notebook I had set up, keeping track of how many credits people had, basically, for 1 hour videos if they ever actually responded to the request to have them. Whereas I think when there's a whole nomination process and a voting process, I think people are more willing to participate in both steps because there's like less pressure, because they know that collectively the group is choosing whether their particular idea is a good one or not, and they don't have that direct pressure of choose what will be a video single-handedly, which is how it was with the $25 and $50 supporters. I think that might have been, that's my interpretation at least, of why people might have not really gotten back very often. It also might have been that just, it was an exciting, fun perk for Jesse the one time when I first came up with it, but a lot of the other people that opted into supporting me may have just wanted to support me and were not interested in that. It may have been. I don't really know. I canceled it in particular because not only was I having trouble keeping up with it, I didn't like how it looked to the outside audience. Because I would do a 1 hour video on something and then maybe a second video on it, because some people would nominate like the same game like 3 times or 5 times, but then they would just stop. And so like I was like, I'm a channel that finishes things I start, and people keep saying to play these games for like 2 hours and then stop, and I'm like, well, it's not a let's try and it's not a one-off, but it does just stop after 3 parts. And while it's cool I gave that one guy what they wanted, now there's like hundreds of or thousands of people watching this video that it just stops and never comes back, and I'm like, I don't like how that looks. And maybe this all ties into the shame ideas before, and your impression or outside impressions of your work ethic and stuff like that. Maybe that's why I finish things I start. Maybe that's what's going on, and maybe that's why I canceled that series, because it led to me continually doing unfinished things in front of people that weren't upfront declared as being unfinished. Because I'm cool with Let's Tries, because I'm like upfront about the fact like this is a one-off, that's the premise of this. I'm doing this because there's a billion video games every day and I can't cover all of them, and this is a chance to kind of cover more of them instead of like letting the key just sit in my Steam library and never get used a single time, which is the alternative in many cases. There's an outside boundary. I need water because I've been talking non-stop for 40 minutes. And now I've got to retrace the thread of how I got there also. Oh yeah, I was just thanking Jesse, basically. And also re-explaining why I canceled that particular series that many of you won't even remember was here. Because for all I know, I might have doubled in audience size since I canceled that series anyway, so some of you may have never even seen it in the first place. I don't remember. I have a bad memory for exactly how many subs I have at any given moment in history. But because of his continued support from like day one of the Patreon, he's both been there nonstop and been one of the top supporters. I wanted to get to his question first-ish, basically, not even knowing what it was going to be. As far as the other part, I'm in the middle of a mob of enemies. We're just going to desperately swing around in this crap. Let's see. Do you believe a work ethic is a natural thing or a learned behavior? And I kind of said both to an extent. I guess I didn't actually cover the distinction between the two, but I also I'm not qualified to cover the distinction between the two, because I can't tell you for sure which parts of human societal interactions are learned behavior versus instinct and natural and stuff like that, because that's some crazy anthropology shit that I'm not prepared for. But I've answered around the question. How did you come to have such a strong work ethic? Being hungry helps. I don't have a super strong indication. I don't think I have a very strong work ethic, to be honest. I think I give the impression of having a strong work ethic compared to other YouTubers because of sheer video output at times. And it's true, I don't know what the story is of a lot of YouTubers and stuff like that is. So I don't know what their situation is or why contents are so divergent and so on. But really, like, I don't have a history of having the strongest work ethic. I went through all of elementary school, middle school, and high school, which, if you're not American, means, well, there's not always even one-to-one analogs, but basically those are the mandatory parts of school, as opposed to the thing that you kind of test into / pay into or whatever later on. It's very confusing because we go elementary school, middle school, high school. That's normal everybody's school, and then there's college, which is after that. But there's other countries that call what we call high school, they call college, and like you can't, but like it's not like, but I've seen people make the mistake of being like, oh, we have college sooner than that. I'm like, no, it's not. You call it college, but it's literally a different thing as far as I can tell. It's just a coincidence of naming, or probably not a coincidence, but it's a misnomer or whatever, or that's misnomer is not the right word either. It's more like the whole distinction between soccer and football, where we just have words where sometimes two different countries call the same thing, two different things the same thing, and we have to then just deal with that confusion forever, because isn't society great? That's a giant cloud of bad things covering me. I'm probably playing this game poorly because, you know, distracted and all that. But I went through all of elementary school, middle school, and high school not trying. Like, not really. I wanted good grades. My parents actually paid me to get good grades, like token amounts of money. I think they gave me like $5 for every A I'd get on a report card, which that's only 4 times per school year. They'd be giving me $5 per A, which is not really a noteworthy amount of money, but hey, when you're in school, it's a little incentive, and maybe that pushed me a little bit. But I never was one to study hard or put extra effort into assignments. I think part of this might also just be that, frankly, if you're just doing the work, just doing it, I think high school might, I think normal school might just not be hard, honestly. I think a lot of it just is that, I think a lot of people that struggle with that stuff instead are maybe dealing with like hormonal imbalances and stuff, and I don't mean that as to say that they're abnormal or anything. I just mean that, like, I think that puberty hits people harder in some cases. I don't know. That's just explaining high school, though. As far as like elementary school and middle school goes, it's like how unruly you are as a kid, I guess. It might be it. I was very shy, and I got along with the teachers better than the kids and so on. And so it probably just led to me just doing my work. But then when I was in high school and so on, like, I had this little monetary incentive to just get good grades, and also it wasn't particularly hard to me. And I think that other high school kids are just distracted a lot. They're preoccupied with their overflowing emotions that come in at being high school. And I remember being a high school kid. I remember some of that stuff, of just weird moments of like, just like crying about things that I literally can't reconcile anymore, where you look back at it, you're like, I don't even know why that was an emotional thing, but there it was, being weirdly emotional that day. It's a lot of stuff is weirdly uncontrollable. It's why I feel really sympathetic for the, like, only a handful of you have been watching this because it's very unpopular on the channel, but in Life is Strange lately, Chloe has been dealing with, like, being this, like, insufferable high school rebel, and being expelled and all these other things, and I'm like, on some level, I'm like, I'm blaming everybody except Chloe for some of the stuff, because yeah, Chloe has a direct role in this stuff, but like, I've been around high school kids. I've watched people just be impulsive and unreasonable, and you kind of do just have to grow out of it, and generally speaking, people don't tend to just like get over it. You can't just reason it out of them, telling them like what they should be doing and what makes sense, because even when people when kids that age know what they should be doing and know that they're making destructive choices, they still don't stop historically. Like, it doesn't really tend to work that way, and so it just doesn't really matter that you can tell them that they're making bad choices. It doesn't, they can fully recognize that, and it won't change anything. And that's tragic, but it's the reality. And so I think I just kind of dodged a bullet twice there, in that I was a kid that that was rather susceptible to early schooling, and then I just didn't, I wasn't one that emotionally rejected later schooling. I just kind of got it over with, and it didn't really bother me. And I've dealt with, and I've always just kind of taken it as a matter of fact. It was like, eh, there's work. I'm just gonna do the work, I guess. Like, even if it's on some level of like I have to or whatever is the thought process, I just kind of do it. And I've actually butted heads on that at some point, where I've dealt with like frayed emotions. I was on a geology trip, and we were there for a whole month. It was the big bad final class. It was really cool, actually. You leave college, you leave your life behind for a whole month. That's actually rather tragic for a lot of the older members of the classroom, or people that are more established, is that they often have jobs, and it's kind of scary because a lot of people can't just leave their job for a month. So if you didn't go into the field or knowing this was going to be at the end of it, then you have this choice between your degree and your job, because you kind of have to quit your job for a month and then try to come back, or so on. It's not the best situation overall. Not necessarily. But it happens. I don't really care about too much of this stuff. Skill Shrine. There we go. So I was in this big final geology course, and the main thing is it was mapping. We were out in the field, we were camping all the time, and so on, and we were mapping these geological contacts and faults and so on. We essentially had a blank topographic map, and we were drawing the geologic formations directly onto it via line of, like, via spatial reasoning on some level, because you were mapping by eye, but you were also dealing with the fact that you had to be able to identify the individual geologic layers and map them out over the course of the map and everything. And you had like a week at each site. Like, we were camping, we'd be camping like a van ride away at an actual at a more reasonable camping site. We'd get shuttled in. We had to have like our multiple liters of water and everything, and our lunch and so on, and we would spend all day just outside and mapping. And we were in pairs, both for safety reasons and for collaboration reasons. And I just had a grand old time with my friend Sid, which some of you will remember as being one of the various cast members of the series Unfairnament that we did back in the day, which was random people playing random games that were selected at random, and half the time people don't even know can't even figure out the controls, and you just have to fight each other or try to win. And the blind nature of that and how unfair it was is why it was called Unfairnament. And it was a dumb, silly series, and I loved it. And I don't know if I'll ever get a large enough group of local people together again that is so willing to be a part of that. But Andrew and I did that for like 5 seasons, and that was fun. But Sid was in that. He was my mapping partner, and we kind of killed that class. But I guess the real question, I guess the real thing is here is, I guess all I can do is describe what my work ethic is, or how it manifests, or how I feel about it, or how I see it. Because the question of how I get it is like a thing that I can't necessarily know. And it's convenient to have like a Hollywood inspirational message about how, like, I didn't have a work ethic and then I rose above that, and here's the steps I took, and here's my TED talk. But I don't have solutions necessarily. I just have who I am to some extent. I just broke my weapon and now I'm really weak. Really funny that you can break your weapon when you're a werewolf. I just need to equip a new weapon, basically. Hey, you. Shit. Hey, is there a weapon just lying on the floor somewhere? You'll have to do. Ta-da. So I was relatively dedicated to this stuff. I think one of the things is when I'm in a thing, I just dedicate myself to doing it right, I guess. Or if I'm investing in a thing, then I'm like, well, I'm investing in this thing. I would hate for it to fail because I just didn't do it right. Like I'm on this trip and I get my first paper back and I got like a C or a D on my first map and report, which there's a lot more to it besides the map. Basically, yeah, like you spend like 5 days in the field doing the mapping, then you spend like 1 or 2 days back at camp writing your report, basically. And you have to, and that's about a whole bunch of other stuff that's really not worth getting into, but ultimately it's all like the overall geologic work. It's all really good practical experience as far as I can tell. Unfortunately, it was practical experience for something I would never have a chance to do in real life as far as I could tell. But, you know, it was there. But I got a D, and I just rolled with it. I was like, all right, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna improve. And so the next week, and also the class is clearly designed in a way for you to get away with the fact that you failed the first time around, because I think the first report was only worth 10% of the class's grade, whereas the other reports were worth, the other reports were worth something like 30% of the class's grade. Like I think there was like 4 reports, and like the first one was very noticeably weekly weighted, so that it was like your test report. It had less impact on your grade, so that you could then learn what you did wrong and proceed forward accordingly. That's my interpretation, and it's not really an interpretation. I think it's just rather officially how it worked. But I came back, and I actually was recognized at one point as most improved, because I improved my grade between 2 reports by like 27% grade or something like that. Like, it was relatively huge, because I just buckled down, paid close attention to every single piece of information I got about why I got the lower grade the first time around, and just used that to improve to have a much better grade the second time around, and I got an A in the class overall by the time the month was over. In fact, giving that little, I think that a more thought out version of this speech about just buckling down and learning the thing and improving based on feedback and just getting the thing done and doing it right. A version of that speech, I think, got me hired when I got my crappy job, because I did give a version of that, a much shorter version, obviously, at my job interview, and I think that might have been why I got the job. I don't know. I've only ever gotten 2 jobs via job interviews, so I don't have a good litmus test, or when you do the job interviews themselves, you never know if you got the job because there weren't really that many other candidates, or because you said something specific that made it work or whatever. All I know is I have done job interviews where I don't get a job, and I similarly didn't know what I did right or wrong, and you kind of just tell your own story to yourself afterwards about why it went the way that it did, and so on. These are disappointing. These are very disappointing items. How dare they sully me with this. Am I really not level 6 still? Not really, huh? Oh well. You have to sell some of the stuff off. No one, I like that. I like the idea that no one's just alarmed that a nightmare wolf man just walks in naked into the middle of town and is like, I would like to do trade. But yeah, I got most improved on a paper, and I don't process things the same way as other people or something, because I had the weirdest experience where so many people were being defeatist about this stuff. At one point, midway through the month, there was people at my table. We were at we went to a Mexican restaurant that was like a half an hour away, because we were having our day off between each report. You do the 5-day thing and then the 2-day report, and you have your day off, more or less, where you have 1 day of just being a normal human for a bit before you go back to the grind of trying to get to this class that takes a lot out of people. And I really pissed somebody off at that dinner, and was a surprise for me, because I don't get into a lot of confrontations, so they always surprise me, basically. Which is, in this case, there was people at the table that were like just being incredibly cynical about what really counts for your grade and what doesn't count for your grade, and like all these unnecessary qualifications about how to do this legit or not legit and things like that. And like it was like they're metagaming the class to an extent, but also probably to some extent just trying to justify to themselves why they didn't succeed in a way that they can feel better about or something. I think that also happens. You can probably project some of this as being some version of what I said before about people people thinking they did everything right, so they have to justify some external force that makes them wrong, that's actually the reason they failed, via our previous topics we've had in this very video. I think some of that was applicable. Can identify all these real quick. This is the hardest part to do while doing questions, because it's just looking at like goddamn questions and whatnot. Not questions, it's me having to read for a second and make snap judgments about what to keep with me, because everything else is just like whatever. I'm clicking on the dudes, they're dying. That's the game. So they're going on about this, and actually it was this one other guy and Sid. Sid was taking part in the conversation. And and what happened is I called them out for being cynical, and I wasn't like being like abrasive about it or anything. I was just saying, like, I was basically claiming like it's not really worth it to try to cynically break down what does and doesn't work, or how the way to win the class is. Like, really the way to go is just try to do the best report you can, and just, you know, just do the work and commit to it, and don't question which parts of it matter more or which parts of it count, and so on. Sid just listened to me because he is a normal human, and he just was and realizes what conversations are. The other guy got up, went around behind me, because he was sitting on the other side of the table from me at the time, and was like having like a "you wanna go" moment, where you know, like when you're like those weird machismo moments where people like puff up their chests and are like invading the personal space of another male so that they can like intimidate or something. It was the most bizarre escalation so abruptly based on so little input that I was genuinely taken aback and confused by the entire interaction and wasn't sure what was happening on a lot of levels. But he was straight up like doing like "say that again" like kind of threats, like he was gonna like put me in the ground or something because I said that we should apply ourselves in school. It was a really weird day. And it was rather amusing that like Tony, which you guys may also know from the Artemis videos, she was kind of known as like Mama Tony within the class, because she was vaguely matrony and commanding, and also the person people always relied on for a lot of things and so on. And she had the great line of "sit your ass down, you're a grown-ass man," which was their reaction to this guy being a lunatic, basically. It was really weird because I had known this person throughout the entire major, so it's not even like we were just meeting in this one class. And so, and he was like, was seemingly just deciding, today's the day I burn this bridge. For the rest of the major, when there were follow-up classes and everything, whenever we were in the same room, I literally would just not. It's the only person I've ever given the silent treatment, besides maybe my brother when we were kids. In that, for the rest of every time I ever saw him, I just didn't acknowledge that he was real, and because what of his behavior was so like unacceptable, and he's actually one of the only people I ever muted on Facebook, as in like not unfollowed, but literally muted, so that when he would show up and sometimes I would just see from that point on in geology related threads on Facebook, I would just see like this people talking at no one, and I would realize, oh, they're talking to that guy, the guy who threatened me for saying we should just, you know, do schoolwork. That was such a weird fucking day. But it was a day of realizing not only does my work ethic somehow differentiate myself from how other people process stuff, perhaps, but also that it might be in a way where if I bring that kind of stuff up, it could go poorly for me, and so on. It's weird reconciling some of these things. This has become story time, I guess. I can wear a werewolf helm now. Yeah. That's all I really wanted. And you're inevitably better. And you're not really that good, actually. Let's go sell some things off. Hello. Do I get my... Yeah, I get my backup now. Alright. This'll go better. So I guess I was being inaccurate earlier when I talked about not having a history of work ethic. I guess it's more that I just don't feel like I have work ethic. Because I don't think I try particularly hard at a lot of things. It's just that when I have a thing I have to do, I just take for granted the fact that I'm going to do it. And even if that's at the cost of other things that I'd rather do, and so on. So like whenever I've been doing my YouTube job, I've just taken for granted, like I've always, especially since it's been my job, I just set up a schedule on my whiteboard and on my notepads and whatnot, and I just very clearly indicate what my workload is, what I need to do, and then I just do it. And if that gets done and I'm feeling good on time, then I'll try to do more. And if I'm behind schedule, then I might put extra time in, more than maybe I should. And if you know, just so on, just kind of basic workflow kind of things. And that's just kind of how I run things. I guess one thing is to be organized. Throughout all of high school, I always made very good use of my planner, which I haven't had an actual planner since then, but you know, the little notebook that they try to give you in high school in many cases, or they try to sell to you or whatever, where it's just like a little, like, tiny spiral notebook that's has a page or a half a page dedicated to each day of the week, and you just write down when things are due on the day they're due, and you just use that to organize all of your assignments and, you know, get shit done, basically. That was basically how I got through a lot of school, and I've always just taken for granted that I will get things done when they're supposed to be done, and that's about the all is to it. I've never really been one to go the extra mile. I think I've largely been kind of unimpressive when it comes to a lot of stuff with assignments and things like that. I just will do the work. And I guess that puts you above a lot of people, because a lot of people just won't do the work. And that comes to, like, a lot of YouTube channels, especially since YouTube, you have to be self-motivated, they just fail. And throughout a lot of school, you fail because you have to be self-motivated. Like, no one can make you do schoolwork. No one can make you do your job. The best they can do is kick you out. And at some point, I think people have a sliding scale of motivation where if they eventually that becomes a no, I have to do this now. When the threat of being kicked out means that I will lose my job, I will lose my income, I will lose my house, I will lose my food and my sleeping places, and become homeless and have to consider how I'm going to try to get to San Francisco, since it's so much easier to survive homeless there than other people. And once you start having those thoughts, you're probably like, you know what, maybe I should just do the work. Maybe I should deal with whatever I've got. Like, the moment I realized that I hated my job, I was constantly planning on what I could do to escape that job. But at no point was I ever thinking, you know what, I'll just stop working. And just let this go, and then try to figure out afterwards. Like, I took for granted the fact that I will stick with this job as long as I have to, and until I can find a better option, because if I don't, then I will just be screwed. And when I say I hate my job, to be clear, I'm talking about my job working at the state water board, not this one. I realized I didn't actually say what I meant, and if you don't already know about my previous job working in a cubicle with spreadsheets all day, you may have very misconstrued that message. Whenever you hear a long pause, it's definitely me drinking more water, because this is danger mode for me. I'm in podcast mode, but I'm solo podcasting, and now it's just stream of conscious. It's so much nonstop talking that I actually feel the wear on my voice, and it's not great. Whereas when I'm doing a let's play, my commentary is more paced by the game itself. and so long unbroken rants that wear on my voice are much less common. And if I'm doing multiplayer Let's Plays or a podcast, there's other people talking that I'm trading off with, which is a pretty comfortable way for a human to use their voice. And it doesn't really... I don't think it even really has a time limit necessarily, unless I'm doing it with Andrew, because we tend to yell. And that does wear on the voice a bit over time. We've had 6 to 8 hour sessions of Zero Escape in the past, where by the end I'm like, I don't even have a voice anymore, really. Although I haven't lost my voice full on for longer than I can remember. I remember what it feels like and sounds like to lose my voice, but I cannot tell you any time it happened, which tells me it must have happened so long ago I was probably in middle school or younger or something, because I don't remember it at all, really. And now I've got to reconcile where I was in the story before I took the drink, god damn it. But yeah, I just do the work. I've never been one to stay up all night, every night, to study for a test, or really go all in to get the paper. In fact, I've had a number of school projects and papers where I kind of did the minimum and just kind of went for it. I think I do have some skill sets that let me get away with being lazy at times. I mean, y'all keep saying that I'm apparently articulate or something, which I didn't exactly earn necessarily, or I didn't make that happen. I don't know how it worked or how that became a thing in the first place. But whenever I'd had like essays and stuff like that throughout all of school, I would just write them and they would just exist, and I'm like, there it is. And oftentimes I wouldn't even read the paper. Like, I would... Like, obviously a report is more intensive because you're doing a bunch of research and conveying that in research into a thing that you have to write, and you have to make sure that it's all in there correctly, and the process of having to cite your sources in particular is proofread intensive and so on, so some of that goes into there. But like throughout all of English classes and so on, throughout all of middle school, high school, and even college, I would just write shit down, and it would just naturally form into like paragraphs and MLA structure without me even trying. I keep pressing W on accident, which changes your weapon setup. In fact, I currently have my hand on WASD, even though you don't use those buttons at all, just because it's the natural resting spot of a keyboard, I guess. Huh. But I would just write papers, and like I didn't have to think about ideas about like having a thesis statement or formatting paragraphs and so on. It would just kind of come out the way it's supposed to some extent, via the way I would like naturally structure my thoughts to begin with. And then my teachers would give me straight A's on all these things that I put very little effort into, and oftentimes even like compliment me for my at times if I violated structures, I would get complimented for it, because it was like I was being seen as somebody who apparently knew the rules so well that I knew how to break them or something, which, I mean, cool, but also I literally can't tell you some of the rules off the top of my head because I didn't learn them. But I have done a lot of writing, and I've gotten a lot of good press for it. I had I think it was junior year of high school, we had a writing exercise where they sat us all down in the library, and we had half an hour to write something. And it could be, I think at most we had a 1-sentence prompt, or it might have just been write anything. And I just went for it. And unbeknownst to me, what we were doing is that we were supposed to like not write our names on the paper, and what we're going to do is we're going to have like a paper tournament where we critique the papers publicly. Different groups would get 2 papers, and they'd have to pick the winner of the 2 papers, and then that would pass on to the next round. And my teacher had scanned the papers onto overhead slides, like projector slides, and we would be able to view them as a class on the projector, and where you just see like the person's handwriting, and all the white part of the paper was now transparent, basically, which was neat, actually. And I won. And I was like, oh shit, really? Because not only did I have the time constraint everyone else had, where you just craft it out really quickly during a time where you don't have time to really proofread or plan or outline or anything, you just were putting it out. I I finished early, like really early, because I was like, I guess I'm done, because I was like, I hit a point where I just didn't have any more to write, so I just sat there for like 10 minutes or something, and then I find out later that, baffling to me, my paper won first prize, and not that there was a prize, but I won anonymously. I don't remember if anyone ever knew that I won, because I don't remember if we ever actually said who any of the papers were by the end of it, but that was a bit of an ego boost, wasn't it? That was a bit of a moment of like, oh, okay, I might know what I'm doing, because you don't, that's a rare moment. And also I kind of feel bad for all the people that placed very poorly, because they might get the inverse effect of what I got, especially if you look at them in terms of the person in my previous story that does not take the right lessons from failure and instead has to rebel against feelings of failure instead of learn from them, which is always not great. Shit. Do I want to go with lycanthropy or werewolf? I have to learn both anyway, because down here are conjoined ones, and I get to show you werewolf, so there's that. Werebear. Also the one, get prepared for, time to get prepared for one of those moments like in a... some decks actually, attack rating affects your hit chance. Get ready for one of those moments like in Ghost of a Tale, where you start questioning the nudity of the characters all of a sudden, because goddamn, dude's very naked. He's so naked. It's very noticeable. Hello, everyone die. I attack very slowly now as a giant bear. Ow, ow, ow. But yeah, if you contextualize. When you have the context of the guy I know from the other story that took to failure very poorly, I do wonder if maybe this whole experiment of a pyramid may have gone poorly. This tournament may have gone poorly for the people that got eliminated in the first round, because they may just see themselves as bad writers and then stop there, and that's a bummer to think about. But I don't know how they went, and they were anonymous, so I can't even ask them. But that was a rare opportunity to have myself compared to everyone in a very direct way. Because normally, at most, what you get is you can compare things in terms of like, hey, I got an A, hey, I also got an A. But that's not like a direct comparison of merit, it's we both did the thing we were supposed to do, and by virtue of having done the thing we were supposed to do, we both get a passing grade. And there's kind of there's often like a ceiling of how grades work, especially in more art-related fields, like English or actual art fields and so on, where it's like a subjective thing. So at most, the people often just grade you on whether or not you did the exact thing you were required to do, and then that's the ceiling of how much the grading comes into play. So you don't really... at some level, if you struggle to get A's, you might be very prideful of getting an A and happy about that, but if you are used to them, then you're just like, yeah, I did the assignment like I always do, and I got confirmation that I did the assignment. Hooray. Fucking Rakinishu. I forgot how impossible Rakinishu is. This monster of a being. I need to revive my pet. Ow. I just called my... Ow. I just called my hire a pet. What the hell is going on with the lag there? It's fine. But yeah, that was a hell of a moment to be like, yeah, no, you didn't just do good on a paper. We compared you with everybody else. I should really be a werewolf, because apparently my helm gives me a bonus to werewolf. My bad. But you don't really get a lot of opportunities to have a direct comparison with a bunch of different people and say, no, yours was the best. And not just like the papers, not just the teacher said yours was the best. The entire class collectively, like compared them all, and through the trial of your peers, you've been determined to be the best writer in this particular example at the very least. And I'm like, cool. This is a very long answer to a question, and it's not even a good answer. It's probably, actually, it might be a great answer, but it's a very long answer. This is longer than the video that caused you all to support me on Patreon already. I've done a bad job. Any suggestions for those who struggle with it? Is the next part of the question, basically. I don't know. I guess the issue is I've never struggled with work ethic, so I can't necessarily tell people how to deal with struggling with their work ethic. all I can do is this is going to be bad advice, I think, is what I would say. I would say that this is going to be bad advice, but I'm going to give it, but take it however you will. Dunning-Kruger or whatever the fuck. There's an issue with people that are successful at something, which is that they try to reverse engineer explanations or advice based on their success, when oftentimes that's just not a useful piece of feedback, and that should be recognized as such. I have no idea which one to go with. I'll probably keep it the maximum damage. It's fine. A good example I think of is when somebody like, it might be Taylor Swift that said it, I don't remember, but also like Danny Sexbang at Game Grumps will say stuff like this, where they'll be like, just follow your dreams and go for it, and it's like, cool, that's great, it's fun advice to come from you, person who has succeeded at a thing, to be all like, yeah, just, you know, follow your dreams, it works for me. It's like, yeah, but also just following your dreams can also lead to like your entire life crashing and burning, and maybe that's really destructive advice to give somebody. And also, when they fail to follow their dreams, maybe you're just like dooming them to just be ashamed of themselves or something like that when it doesn't work out, even though that's how most people work and all that stuff. So I'm not super fond of giving advice when you don't actually know how to do well at a thing necessarily, or how to fix a thing. All I can do is say what I did, which is, at best, just if you have a thing you want to do, or you have work that needs to be done or something, my way to have doing that has always just been to take for granted the fact that you have to do it. And that means and that has always historically for me meant that it's going to get done. And that's my process? Question mark? Like, but like even that's biased in favor of like elements of like my personal privilege making my life easier in a lot of ways, and then also elements of like I'm just hoping my hire can take care of this monster for me, but she's gonna die, isn't she? Come on, get him. Oh, well, I tried. Son of a bitch, it's always that lightning effect. It's so bullshit. It's so bullshit. Oh boy. I might have to just focus on this for a second. Yes, they're dead. And they wouldn't be that strong, but that lightning effect is the most dangerous thing in all of Diablo 2, and it always will be. It's absurd. They did the spinning laser thing in Diablo 3, and it never was as dangerous as the goddamn lightning effects in these games, where the particles just shoot out and ruin your day. But yeah, that's the best I can give you. I don't know why I am the way I am. Certain parts of my personality and whatnot are probably elements of some kinds of natural talent, which I'm not trying to say that in a douchey way of like I'm superior or anything, because that's not really what I'm getting for, but there are certain things that I'm more apt to, and that can be levels of like being good at like a certain form of writing, or being proficient at certain skills, or being somebody whose thoughts are structured in a way where I'm more likely to do things the way that society likes them to be done. But also like just elements of like I just take for granted that I'll do things that I'm supposed to do, and I can't tell you why that's how I process that stuff, only that is how I process that stuff one way or another, and that's just how I came out, as it turns out. It's weird. It's hard to reverse engineer advice for why you do well at something, beyond, especially if you're trying not to do the dangerous thing of just outright giving people bad advice. I'm just gonna, speaking of bad advice, I'm gonna spew these gems all over my partner over here, even though I really shouldn't, probably. There we go, enjoy all that damage. And now I've wasted a bunch of expensive, not expensive, but things I could have held on to better, gems. But that's more or less my takeaway. Sorry if it's not the best advice, but maybe that helps someone. But I don't have experience on how to help people in these contexts. I do have experience as a tutor, I am fairly patient and articulate and willing to explain things, so I have actually not worked, because that implies job as opposed to extracurricular at school, because I have a gap in my schedule and I'm not allowed to leave, which is the real reason. Because I had a scheduling conflict in my high school, and I wasn't allowed to leave campus, so they're like, you can be a tutor now. That's what we do with the people that are like you. Great. So I tutored people through, like, geometry or something when I was taking, like, Algebra 2 or Pre-Calculus or something. I don't remember what it was. I think I was taking Calculus, and I was tutoring Pre-Calculus. That's probably what it was. So I can do that stuff. I can try to explain concepts to people, and then keep re-explaining them until it works out. Fucking timing me out here? Game server's gonna restart? Son of a bitch. That's a thing? I don't remember that. Do servers have time limits in Diablo 2? I don't remember. Shit. Anyway, just going off on tangents now. It's been what it is the whole time. But unfortunately, I can, even though I can explain concepts to people, or at least try very hard to and not give up quickly, explaining to people how to better themselves or what's best for them is both something that I don't know how to motivate people to do, and also is like a presumption on a level where I don't generally presume to tell people how to lead their lives better, because I don't have, in many cases, a leg to stand on at being somebody who has things figured out to begin with. But I think I've said enough at this point. I have more than enough, perhaps. I'm sure Jesse's satisfied with the answer. They won't all be this long, I swear. I mean, they already wasn't, because the other person gave me very little to work with, and I just went with that. We're just going to power through the rest of the email real quick, because I need to read through that real quick. Oh, ideas for extended... They went on to suggest ideas for Patreon. Idea number 1, new Patreon stretch goal, $2,000 or whatever helps stability. 2 times Patreon sponsored shows. You said it gets a lot of views anyway, so why not capitalize on a twofold? I'm not 1,000% against that idea, because having more Patreon slots is not the worst, because 1, the shows do well on my channel, but 2, like, the shows do well on my channel. Same explanation, but 2 different reasons. 1 being that on one level... sorry, weird hiccup thing? I don't even know what those are. It's not a hiccup, it's a weird thing where, like, my breathing stops working for a second. That sounds way more alarming than it is. Only people who are way more vocally coached than me will have a better explanations for those moments, but there's weird moments where it's like... it's almost like a hiccup yawn moment where you're midway through a word and you stop being able to use your throat correctly to say sounds, and it's not like a dangerous thing, but it's literally like it's like your voice box or whatever has like relaxed or opened or something in a way where the sound isn't forming anymore, and you have to just like take a breath and start the sound over is usually how it goes. It's a weird moment that I've become very familiar with while not necessarily understanding any more than I did the first time it happened. I'm not super against the idea because, 1, obviously the Patreon shows do well for me financially, both because they're Patreon supported and that itself is a payment, but also because those playthroughs get more views because the audience likes them, and doing things the audience like is often not a bad thing. They do quite well, and so that means I make more money from the playthroughs themselves, as long as they're not Zelda, because Zelda I can't make any money off of, because of the whole Nintendo situation. Which, to give you guys an update on that, Nintendo now does allow ads on Nintendo videos, but it's really convoluted, where what they do is they claim the video, and then in order to get money off the video, what you need to do is you need to join the Nintendo Partnership Program website, and you need to individually apply for that individual video to be approved for monetization. And then when it gets approved for monetization, which could take a week, which with my workflow means that I'm missing out on all the views of the video being new, and it's just a week later getting monetization later basically. After all that time passes, then it gets monetized via Nintendo. But Nintendo, I think, is... I don't know how all the variables work here necessarily, but I think that they're not particularly aggressive when it comes to negotiating for ads and so on and so forth. So as far as I can tell, it's probably, I'd imagine because of the child-friendly nature of Nintendo, it might be that the ads they go with are advertising that's like very child-friendly or something, maybe. All I know is that the ad rates are terrible for games with Nintendo videos, or at least after the cut, what I get is terrible. Because basically the culmination of all those Zelda playthroughs I've done, which now I've played through like 4 Zelda games, and there's also some Mario on my channel and stuff like that. The end result of that, and all of those videos all being approved, which they all are on the Nintendo program, is that once a month I get a transaction on my PayPal where I am given $2, basically, like $2 or $3, and that's the entire month of my cut for all of the different Zelda and Mario content videos on my channel. That's what they amount to. It's pretty brutal. So basically, you're just not making money at my scale. Maybe when you're a larger YouTuber, maybe it works out better in some way, but I don't know, because I'm not an expert on many things. Especially that shit. Exactly. Let's get up on attack rating, because I need to hit more. My hit rate's garbage. So I'm not against the idea of doing 2 Patreon series. One thing is just being paralyzed a little bit, because it is a little bit... First of all, I have to run 2 separate, potentially run 2 separate polls at a time. It is possible the idea of having the secondary Patreon series be a second tier, where only people that are voting, only people that contribute above a certain level are allowed to participate in that poll. So I'd have 2 separate Patreon tiers, where there's like there's the everyone Patreon vote, and the higher level Patreon vote is one potential idea for trying to grow things to give me better chances overall and stuff like that. But then the one issue I have there is, one, there's the thing where people feel locked out, but also the thing where I might lose the first part that was working, which is that it would be fun to have some spells, wouldn't it? Can I cast spells when I'm in this form? No, that's what I thought. Getting rid of some of this garbage. There we go. That might be a better item for her. Shit.
I'll put that to good
Nope.
use.
All those gems add up to a lot. That'd be good to sell, though. One issue I have is that if I make a secondary Patreon that's more exclusive, a second Patreon vote series that's more exclusive, that the end result might be more eclectic games that might not be some stuff that I'm super into, but also might be stuff that the audience isn't super into because it's being chosen by a smaller number of people. The more collective voting we have right now does have the upside of that. It's part of the reason why those series do so well. I think in the past, in the early Patreon days, while they've never done particularly poorly, I think that the Patreon series used to be less popular, and I think that the reason why the Patreon series has become more popular is because the larger number of voters and nominators means that the end result game is something that speaks to the audience on some level as something that they want, and it's often something that I didn't predict, so it's often a surprise. Like, the sheer number of people that are happy to see Papers, Please is like not something I would have ever guessed. I had considered Papers, Please before, but I thought that would be like a weird thing that just I was into, and like I knew the game was successful, but I didn't expect a Patreon playthrough of Papers, Please to take off the way it did, but y'all proved me wrong. And so those kinds of surprises are one of the cool things that gets unearthed by the large scale of the Patreon right now, and I think that happened less back when stuff like Crash Bandicoot was winning, and Super Meat Boy. I don't think those playthroughs were as popular, but they did fine. So these are all options I think about them. One of the other downsides of having more Patreon playthroughs is I have even less control of my schedule, because I don't think I can reasonably do more videos per day. I used to a little bit, and it was difficult in general, and I would rather not scale up again. So if I did more Patreon playthroughs per day, that would mean that that'd be one more Patreon playthrough replacing another thing, and so that means less mobility. Because that means that I essentially, like, I would have like my one puzzle slot, my indie game slot, my what's my schedule right now? I'd have a puzzle game slot, an indie game slot, a And a Western RPG slot is, I think, something I'm going with right now because I want to keep that genre alive on my channel, even though they often don't do that well. But it's kind of it kind of was the backbone of my content originally. And then between those 3 and then 2 Patreon slots, that's of my 6 videos per day. That's 5 of them accounted for as slots that are always the specific thing. And you add to that the fact that I usually am doing an Andrew series, and that's often the last slot. And also, I also have been considering the idea of scaling down to 5 shows altogether instead of 6, mainly because my 6 shows have kind of become 7 shows. So I've been considering the whole plan of 6 videos per day was like a very specific goal of like trying to throttle myself, and I let myself unthrottle myself, and I'm not super happy about that. Because I started doing Let's Tries and multiplayer videos. The multiplayer videos kind of happen regardless because it's part of how I socialize and how I maintain my relationship with Wander and Bird and everyone. And so I keep having those sessions regardless of whether I'm uploading them, so I figured I might as well upload them. And then but then I also want to do the Let's Tries because the Let's Tries are a thing that I want to do because of the fact that there's so many games I can't cover, so I want to try to give them at least a video in many cases. But that has become a 7th slot on accident. So I've been often considering canceling one of my existing slots. One of my current plans I might go through with is that once Zero Escape is finally done, that I might just stop uploading anything in that time slot. That Zero Escape might be the end of that time slot, and then that becomes the multiplayer Let's Try, the multiplayer / Let's Try alternating time slot that I have right now. And that'll be back to 6 videos per day instead of 7, because 7 was an accident. And of course, it becomes 8 videos per day whenever I upload a podcast or a D&D video or this, although this counts less than that it's not public or whatever, but you know what I mean. Workflow stuff. I specifically constrained myself to 6 videos per day to try to keep my workflow clean, and then I fucked it up like immediately, basically. So if you see the time slot after Zero Escape vanish, don't be alarmed. I'm not completely sure if I'll do it or not, but it might happen. And I might even try to be quiet about it and not... unless a bunch of people ask questions about it, I might even try to just be quiet about it because it'd be easier just not to address it directly. That there's fewer videos. Because then people don't really think about it as much, and people might not even notice because there's frankly already a lot of videos. Just gonna assume that's an upgrade because it's yellow. But doing... Please avoid mewling during this time. They're using terminology. Oh, that's how you know this is not a Blizzard server. When they're saying crap like that, they're saying, please avoid mewling. What mewling is in Diablo, people would have a whole bunch of different alts. And you can see this is limited inventory space, and that stash I had back at base is limited inventory space, but people have all these items they want to hold on to. So they make alternate characters just so they can hold on to more items on those characters. And what you have to do to mule is that you have to have your friend host a server for you, and then you come into that server and you drop her items on the ground, then switch to your other character, and you pick up the items with the other character. You could probably also do this by dual booting, which is by running 2 copies of the game or something, maybe, but that's how it generally worked. So you just had to have a person you trusted to let you transfer items from character to character, because there's no in-game way to do that. And obviously, if the server resets, then you're going to lose all that shit. So that's why they're specifically warning you not to do that. I find that interesting. Alright. So, another part of it, oh boy. Idea number 2, the manga corner. Show off your collection of manga and show/describe how it affected you. I'm not a big manga person. I might give a false impression due to mentioning it lately. But I'm not actually a big person on manga. I've been collecting Junji Ito comics because I like them, but I've also been collecting non-Japanese comics too. Like I have the Creation Myths series of Dark Crystal and The Power of the Dark Crystal, which was going to be Dark Crystal 2 until they canceled the movie, and then they just made instead a comic series out of the scripts, is what they went with. That's just the idea there. Take it to the Darkwood, right? Yeah, our next objective is just the Darkwood. I don't really for me, the aesthetic of manga and anime has zero intrinsic appeal to me. I'm not anti-anime or whatever, but nothing about it appeals to me as far as the aesthetic and its tropes. There's no bonus points for being a manga. One of the handful of things that helps a bit. No, I don't have anything. No, I thought I was going somewhere with that sense, but it really doesn't go anywhere, honestly. But so I'm not really a manga person. I don't have a manga collection necessarily, and I don't have a lot of stories to tell about how they affected me as a person necessarily. Once upon a time, I used to subscribe to Shonen Jump, and I subscribed to that for a few years. And there was a giant stack of them because I used to keep all my copies of Game Informer and Shonen Jump around all the time, and they would just be in a giant stack because I didn't want to throw them away. Because as a child, and then teenager, I'm like, I paid for these. These are my belongings. Like the idea of disposable things was like didn't sound right. So like when I had stuff like these comics that you're supposed to like get in the mail, have for a month, and then throw away. I'd say it's more Game Informer than Shonen Jump, because Shonen Jump you're getting real manga that you can in fact, you know, read. Although Andrew has told me that in Japan, very much part of the culture is that they print Shonen Jump on like garbage paper, and you're supposed to immediately recycle it the moment you're done with it, which because it's just inherently disposably produced and cheaply produced, and you just churn through to the next issue all the time. Which, on some level, almost sounds like a strategy to incentivize people to buy the stuff twice, because you pay for the magazine first, and then you pay for the same manga again in non-magazine form. It seems like a bit of a way to get more money out of people, honestly, but, you know, you do you. I think I'm gonna stick to Werewolf. I always preferred Werewolf because it's faster, and it looks neat. And you don't get distracted by the bizarre nakedness of the werebear, because the werewolf's always in those poses where he's like... It looks like every painting ever that somebody makes of like a tastefully nude werewolf character, or even werewolves in movies, where they're always conveniently covered in shadows, or like a paw or a leg is always covering the crotch, so you're not actively thinking about the fact that there's just a weird Ken doll thing going on. Get out of here. They're dead. They're dead, and they're never coming back. I need their life potions, please. Also, I need to find a waypoint before the server restarts, apparently. Because I don't think I'm going to stop here. I might go for a while today, and I will not get through all the questions, because I'm still on, like, the second one, but I'm going to get you guys your money's worth for this first one as a big thank you for the fact that you guys all chose to support me. And I do thank you for that again. But as far as the manga goes, I don't think it has any intrinsic, like... I don't think it did anything major for me as a person, and I don't think it shaped me, and I don't think I have stories to share about the act of having manga. It's just that at most I might share the fact that I enjoy the manga, and that's about it. If I look at my collection right now, I have like 6 different books made by Junji Ito, including Uzumaki, Gyo, Tomi, Dissolving Classroom, Fragments of Horror. There might be another one in there. I have All You Need Is Kill, which is it was originally a novel, a short story or something, I think. Then it became this manga art, drawn by the same person that did the art for Death Note, and then it also became a Tom Cruise movie called The Edge of Tomorrow, which is the cool name, and then they called it Live Die Repeat, which is a stupid name. It's a stupid name. It's not as stupid as All You Need Is Kill, because All You Need Is Kill is a stupid, meaningless name that doesn't even slightly articulate the name of the meaning of the series. But Edge of Tomorrow is a cool fucking title, you guys. Just because it's very, I mean, it's very literal, but it's a cool image of this person that's looping forever, Groundhog Day style, so they're always on the edge of tomorrow, and I'm like, I like that phrase, that works for me. Live, Die, Repeat is so mechanical and fucking boring, and it was a lazy attempt to rebrand. It was this awkward attempt to rebrand the movie because of the fact that it didn't do well in theaters, so when they were putting it on DVD, they just renamed it. I'm like, oh, great. Aside from that, I have Solanine. I don't have any particular attachment to Solanine. I was a bit amused by the fact that it was like the Looking for Alaska of manga, but I bought it on a whim because I was at a Barnes & Noble, and I got 2 Junji Ito books, and they had buy 2 get 1 free, and they had no more Junji Ito books, so I was like, hey, this Solanine thing looks cool. I have a preference for anything that's 1 volume. If the entire story starts and ends in a single book that's like a 600-page manga, then I'm very happy. I don't want to buy 10 years of One Piece or whatever, and I also just don't like what happens to stories when they're that long. Like, what introduced me to anime was Full Metal Alchemist, and to this day many of the other examples just never capture that because FMA was like 50 episodes long and then it was over, and the other version of it was also good, but goodbye server. Blurkle, 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 blurkle. Does it let me back in? Yep. There we go. They kicked me out. But I'm fine because I already had the transfer, so we're good. Feel free to give feedback in the comments if you think that I'm fucking up at this episode, because I'm very aware of the fact that I've been just running with this fucking premise for so long. Admittedly, it's also a detailed multi-step question, and I don't want to disallow those kinds of things because I'm cool with that idea, but audience feedback may dictate a little bit whether or not I go full bore into this kind of stuff, or if I try to shorten their question or spend less time on it or whatever, and so on. But yeah, I like stories that have a beginning and a middle and an end, and they have some sort of plan on ending. And a lot of my favorite shows tend to be something in that scale, like a Breaking Bad, for example. And a lot of my favorite comics, both Western and Japanese, tend to be something that is relatively concise and done in a few volumes and so on. And I usually won't even bother buying something if the intention is to be a superhero comic that goes for ever and ever. I especially have no interest in American superhero comics because of the fact that they, not only are they meant to be indefinite stories that never end, and as a result can in some ways kind of feel like they have no stakes. I get frustrated by the fact that crossover events and reboots and stuff like that have a tendency to completely neuter any meaning the story has, and that can be kind of frustrating. Especially like those things where I think like comics even have moments where they kill a character in a crossover event, and you're like, but that isn't their story, and you killed them in somebody else's story, and stuff like that's happening. I've had that frustration with television recently, actually, because like there's a television show called The Flash, and The Flash develops these characters and these storylines, and then off camera you'll just find out that some character got married or some character died, and you're like, excuse me? I was attached to that character and they're dead now? And you're like, yeah, they died in a crossover event in somebody else's show, and I'm like, what? Or like, Flash gets married in an episode of Arrow or Supergirl, I think, and I'm like, what? But what about the people who watched Flash for 5 seasons and haven't been watching those other shows because they only like the Flash? Fuck off? Like, what's up with that? So I'm not a big fan of that stuff in general. There was incidentally some of that recently in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but actually that was an example of me being kind of okay with it, but that was because the characters that had consequences during Infinity War, for example, were characters who were directly tied to the Thanos storyline even in their own movies. So them having things happen to them in the crossover special is fine because of the fact that it's still at least part of their story and not a weird out of nowhere thing, and so on. I don't know. There's enough time on this question. Thanks for asking the question. I'm going to move on to another one.